All right, well, hi everybody, and welcome to our discussion today about the first 90 days open enrollment program at IMD. This is a relatively recently created program about which I'm very excited and have really enjoyed offering so far at IMD, with the next offerings coming up actually in sort of mid-September, and a full range of offerings 4 times per year coming forward. I'm just going to give you an overview of the program, talk a little bit about the impact, a little bit about the format and the way the program is run, which I think is a really sort of excellent interactive kind of approach to doing things, a little bit about, as I said, the impact and the sort of participant that really is going to benefit from this. But just a little bit briefly on me. So I'm a professor at IMD, Leadership and Organizational Change. I'm also a co-founder of a consulting company called Genesis Advisors that specializes in leadership development around transitions. For the last 15 years, I've been working on leadership transitions. My passion is really to help leaders make successful transitions into new roles. I'm the author of a book, The First 90 Days on Transitions, most recent edition, 2012, but also lots of other articles, resources, thoughts about how to make successful transitions into new leadership roles. I've actually just got an article in the latest Harvard Business Review, just came out a couple of days ago, on a related topic, which is how do you sort of condense and focus the work that an organization needs to do. This is something you can certainly do as you come into a new role. So just to start off, why are transitions critical? Hopefully fairly obvious for you, because I guarantee most of you, probably all of you, have been through numerous transitions, but getting off to a good start in a new role is both hard and really important. The Will Rogers quote, really there's some deep truth in that. You don't get a second chance to make a first impression. If you're successful in doing some good things, we'll talk about what those are, early on, you can create some momentum for yourself. You can build some virtuous cycles into what you're doing. But if you get into trouble early on, it can be very difficult to recover. There's also so much going on during a transition that having a framework and a set of tools to help you really distill out the essence of the situation you're facing and begin to create a plan is really very valuable. Transitions are also times when there's often both excitement and a certain sense of vulnerability and perhaps even anxiety. And so how do you work your way through that? Again, having a structured framework, a proven approach for doing it is really very helpful. I started doing research on the first 90 days, actually focusing on the reasons why leadership transitions fail. And that's both fail in terms of people coming in from the outside, many of whom, onboarding into new companies really do struggle, and a substantial portion derail. But it turns out to be equally true for people making internal moves. Internal moves, especially if you're going to different units or moving geographically or going to a different line of business, can be as or more challenging than taking a new role in the first place. And so I've really advocated very strongly that organizations help people making internal transitions as much as they help people coming in from the outside. There's still a gap there. Most organizations still do a better job of bringing people in from the outside than they do moving people internally. And in fact, they do a better job of helping people at lower levels than they help people at higher levels, which, if you think about it, doesn't really make a lot of sense in terms of the net impact. But a good starting point is to think a little bit about what are some of the common traps that leaders fall into as they take new roles. I'm not going to go through these in detail. You can sort of, if you want, treat this as a bit of a checklist, sort of, I fell into that one in this, role, and I fell into that one in this role, because they really are pretty common mistakes that people make, especially when they're relatively inexperienced in taking on new roles. And this is, of course, something we'll talk about in a lot more detail in the course of the program. We operate the program with a basic framework and set of tools. We call the framework the transition roadmap. You can see that on the left side of the page. It's these 8 key elements of making a successful transition. On the left side are things that are more diagnostic, that really will help you think hard about the situation that you're in and begin to understand what the consequences of that is and how you begin to formulate a strategy. So it's things like, how do you speed up your learning, right? There's so much to learn typically as you take a new role. My personal practice as a coach is with CEOs taking new jobs, either onboarding from the outside or being promoted, internally from a CFO or COO, sort of role. But there's just so much to learn. And how do you really distill down and build a learning plan for yourself? How do you match your strategy to the different kinds of situations that you face? And one of the frameworks we use is on the upper right there, the STARS framework: startup, turnaround, accelerated growth, realignment, sustaining success. The type of situation or mix of situations you inherit often have a pretty big impact on the way you need to think about making a successful transition. And you really need to be thoughtful about both diagnosing the situation, seeing how other people, like your new boss perhaps, or your team is seeing the situation, and really, working through what the implications are for the best strategy moving forward. And then the third box on the left is about gaining alignment. That's really about how do you really get fundamental alignment on a variety of key things with, for example, your boss. And that starts with things like working style, right? You'll see on the lower right, we do some work in the program on communication styles. And what happens if you're working with someone who has a very different communication style than you do? But of course, alignment's more than about working style. It's also about, does your boss see the situation the same way you do, right? Does he or she have expectations that are aligned and achievable with what you think you need to do? Are you going to get access to the kind of resources that you need to really make perhaps the kind of change necessary that you need to make? Armed with a deeper understanding of your situation, you can begin to work more on that middle box, which is about establishing direction for yourself and your organization. And as you kind of get clearer on that, you can begin to work on some of those right side orange boxes, right? Building your team. And building your team for most leaders taking new roles is not really about building a team from scratch. It's about inheriting somebody else's team and then assessing and reshaping and accelerating it to be and do what you need it to be and do. And in fact, that's often a much more challenging process than building a team, because there's legacy, there's history, there's people, and you've got to figure out sort of how that all is working and whether it's going to really serve you as you go forward into the new role. And then, of course, there's core things you need to do to build momentum. For example, how are you going to go after early wins? What wins will you pursue? How will you, in fact, go about doing that? And then there's the core part of creating alliances. And this is more than just about creating relationships. It's about identifying whose support is really crucial for your success and beginning to connect with and gain alignment with them in terms of what you really need to do. And then you'll notice at the bottom in the gray there is manage yourself, and that goes through the entire process, because there's really a critical part of making transitions that's about, working with your own internal emotional dynamics and approaches as you go through this, making good judgments, connecting with the right people for advice and counsel, understanding that there's going to be the inevitable ups and downs. So this framework is really the structure we also use for the 2-day program. We work you through that, with the output being a plan for the next 90 days, right? Not necessarily the first 90 days. It'll depend on when you come into the program, how far you are into your transition, but you'll emerge with a plan for the next 90 days. The impact, fortunately, we've been able to do research over the course of almost a decade on this, some of the most recent of which was published in Harvard Business Review last year in an article I co-authored on onboarding. But the consistent finding has been that doing the right things really can dramatically speed up your ability to come to full performance in a new role. And in fact, very consistently, the result has been, about a 50% reduction in the time to full performance. So if it would normally take you 6 months to get into, fully up to speed in a new role, that would take it to 30. And this research was done looking not just at what the new leader thought, but also what their boss thought, what their HR business partner thought. So it's quite robust research in terms of the quite powerful impact that the process can have on your success as a new leader. Designed for multiple types of transitions, this goes back to something I was saying earlier, which is it's not just for people coming in from the outside. It certainly is for them, but it's also for people making internal moves. And in fact, what we consistently find is that most leaders in transition actually are experiencing multiple transitions in parallel. They may be joining a new company or a unit of their current company, which is onboarding of a form, moving geographically, promoted. Leading former peers is a subset of promotion, right? Where you've got to establish yourself in quite a new role in relation to people you formerly worked with. And then there's a few others here, moving from a functional to cross-functional role. Dealing with an unfamiliar type of business situation, that's an example, again, of where the STARS framework can be helpful, because perhaps you've mostly been doing turnarounds and now you're doing something that looks more like a realignment and sustaining success situation. So what you did before in terms of approach may not map perfectly to that new situation. And I always want to stress that the more types of transitions you're experiencing as a leader, the bigger the risk you face, the more you really need to focus on your transition, and perhaps the more support would be beneficial for you as you go into the new role. I really try to talk to companies about this, by the way, because I don't think there's an understanding that there's a spectrum of risk that people face taking new roles. I see companies making bigger bets on talent, but that's also equivalent to, when you say bet, risk, right? And that risk often is associated with the size of the leap that you're asking people to make as they go into a new role. A focused 2-day workshop. So the format is 2 days. We're going to do a pre-program webinar and a bit of pre-program pre-work. The program pre-work is not onerous. It's a few very short case studies of transition situations. You'll see the structure of the 2 days really takes you through the transition roadmap framework. We'll do a reconnect afterwards. And then, as I will talk about later, there's some options for post-program work if you decide to pursue them. Program flow, I think, is a fairly logical flow. You're taking stock of your situation, you're figuring out how to align, you're establishing direction, you're assessing your team and reshaping your team, building alliances, creating momentum. So, there is a logic to the flow of the program that really maps what is typically the progression of priority as you move through the transition process. A highly interactive experience. So I designed this based on lots of experience designing executive and leadership development programs, but it's a little different in ways that I'll talk about in a second. But it really adopts, kind of best practice methodology in terms of how leaders best learn and apply concepts. So there's not lectures, of course, there's introductions of concepts, case discussions with groups of participants, application of the ideas to your own case study. And by your own case study, I mean, as a leader in transition, you are your own case study in this circumstance. Peer dialogue, peer discussion to help clarify your diagnosis and planning. And really, you will come out with quite a complete plan for your next 90 days, right? Again, we take you where you are in terms of your transition, help you take stock of your situation, and then build out a plan for the next 90 days. What makes this quite different from other leadership development activities is it really is a real-time planning workshop, right? We're not there so much to teach you new concepts, although of course we're doing that, but we're also there to really help you apply them very directly to your situation. And so the time that you're investing in coming to the program shouldn't be thought about time off. It should be thought about as core work you're doing to take stock, distill the essence of what you're facing and build a plan to go forward, right? So it's very much in the stream of what you should be doing ideally anyway to really accelerate yourself into that new transitional situation and that new role. Engaging mix of participants. I mean, I love this program because we get such a rich group of people, diverse positions. I should say most folks are at a reasonably senior level in the organization, so it's certainly manager and above. We often have people at very senior levels, CEO, COs, CFOs in the program. We're very careful to match people to peer groups within the program that are, at the same level, right? Because you want to be having the level of conversation. So if you're a CEO, we do the best we can to try and match you with other people that have equivalent levels of experience, so you can have a dialogue that really goes to a depth that's going to have the most possible impact on helping you make your transition. And you can see we've got a really interesting mix of companies, industries, nationalities that have come to the program so far. Track record of success, ratings are always a kind of a blunt instrument when it comes to evaluating the impact of a program, but the ratings have been very high and consistently high. We've had really strong endorsements from people in the companies we've had engagement with. In some cases, we've had companies that are sending people now to every program, which is very exciting for me because I get to learn about the companies, be able to engage with people at that level. The testimonials have consistently been very strong. This is what I love to do, right? So it's very gratifying to see the impact that the program has had and hear about how people have kind of gone forward and applied the ideas and been successful in making what is in some cases some really challenging transitions into new leadership roles. Is this program for you? Well, what I would say is that, there's obviously a filter you should be applying here as you think about it. You've recently taken on a challenging new role or will do shortly. For those of you that are in a new role, I generally recommend that 3 or 4 months is kind of the boundary, right? If you're past that, it may not be so beneficial to come to the program. I joke sometimes that I don't want you to come and then experience post-transition regret because there's all these things you would have done differently. At the same time, if you're going into a new role, you need to know enough typically about what that new role looks like to be able to apply some of the ideas, but there's still tremendous value in having a framework that you then begin to apply as you move into the new role. I should say too, that the program's not just for people who themselves are taking new roles or at least getting new titles. You may well be keeping your same title, but it's a major new project you're taking on or a new team that you're adding to your portfolio of responsibilities, or perhaps you just want to take your current team in quite different directions. We do a very big piece in the program about that team, inheritance assessment, reshaping, and how you really move a team potentially in a new and important direction going forward. Post-programs options, there's a few. These are not included with the program, but there's certainly things we're happy to talk about. You can work with one of our coaches, very talented transition coaches, to help you think about how to deepen your understanding and get into some regular pattern of feedback and discussion as you move through your transition. We have options for you to bring the company inside, or sorry, not the company, bring the program inside if you want. If you've got a critical mass of leaders taking new roles, and that happens, by the way, there can be, instances where a part of the organization has just got a lot of transition going on. And so getting those people in with a common language and framework and working together on accelerating that transition, to a new structure, to a new culture can be tremendously valuable. Or if you've got quite a substantial amount of transition happening on an ongoing basis that justifies doing something internally, we're certainly happy to talk to you about how to think about that. There are benefits to having people from the same organization go through these programs because you understand the situation. At the same time, there's also benefits to coming to a program that doesn't have anybody necessarily in your organization, because you can really step out from where you are, get some fairly independent viewpoints about how you should be thinking about the new role. I do want to say a little bit about the organizational impact of transitions in terms of thinking about how you can not just accelerate your own transition, but think about speeding up all the transitions that go on in organizations. There's kind of a hidden dimension of organization, which is how much transition is going on at any given point in time. Our research has shown that for large companies, typically it's about 1/4 of the leadership ranks every year. But I often sort of, ask people in the class, how many of you, obviously are in transition themselves, most, but also how many of them have a boss who's 6 months or less in their role, a direct report who's 6 months or less in their current role, a peer who's 6 months or less in their current role. And what you find is that virtually everybody is being touched by at least one transition. Everybody in the organization is being touched by one transition. And this really is, for me, has been the case for trying to bring transition acceleration to your organization on a more systematic basis, right? Think about how do you embed some core ideas about speeding up transitions into the culture? How do you create a common language in an organization for really speeding up and accelerating everybody taking new roles? The benefits for organizations, I mentioned the benefits at the individual level, but the benefits at the organizational level are very high and really revolve around reducing likelihood of derailment for sure, but accelerating time to performance. There's good research that shows that if you help people make successful transitions into new roles, you increase retention and engagement. And then, of course, if you're talking about senior leaders, these are enormous investments that organizations are making, and to do even some simple things to help, reduce the risk, increase the likelihood of success can pay enormous benefits for the organization. That's my quick overview of what's going on at IMD. There's some links here for you to follow if you're interested, a full description of the program, a bit more on the content and learning approach, a bit of testimonials from course alumni. And really at this point, what I would do is just kind of sum up, right? Back again to the core premise here, an opportunity for you as a leader in transition, or you as a person who has leaders in your organization in transition to, experience something quite focused and compact that you can come in and really, dive deep into your situation, get some support for doing that, understand a very powerful framework for how to make successful transitions, and really emerge with a sense of acceleration out the other side.